supplements. Let's learn about Marxism and capital accumulation for real. Starting with this video by Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk. The top 1% has taken 50 trillion from the bottom 90%. For those who don't know, as I've said on stream many a time, Kyle Kulinski is what really got me into the left. You know, when I was in high school, I was a fan of The Amazing Atheist, who's like a Bernie bro, social democrat, who's also like basically a conservative when it comes to like social issues and stuff. He makes all these like anti-feminist videos, or at least that's what he did. And then I found Kyle Kulinski in college, and I was like, this guy seems more rational. He's mostly focused on policy. You know, he's saying, why are we spending all our money bailing out corporations and paying for imperialistic wars of aggression rather than helping the American people? And I learned a lot from that, and I really liked it. Later, I would discover Marxism and discover I had a lot of criticisms of social democrats and progressives like Kyle. However, he was a good starting point for me, a sort of gateway into Marxism. And what I've been trying to do with this series, teaching Marxism to Kyle Kulinski, is sort of help facilitate that same transition for a lot of people. Help people who Kyle has gotten into left-wing politics, left-wing economic values, teach those people about Marxism, teach them the failures of reformism and social democracy, and criticize Kyle's specific talking points about them, while also pointing out where Kyle is right and why people like him. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started.
Brought about by COVID is beginning to reveal itself in stark terms. This is what CNBC says. Yelp data shows 60% of business closures due to the coronavirus pandemic are now permanent. Yelp on Wednesday released its latest economic average report, revealing business closures across the U.S. are increasing as a result of the coronavirus. As of August 31st, 163,735 businesses have indicated on Yelp that they have closed, a 23% increase since mid-July. According to Yelp data, permanent closures have reached 97,966, representing 60% of closed businesses that won't be reopening. This is an aspect of what happened with COVID and the CARES Act that's not discussed nearly enough. But what you're very likely to see happen is, as all of these smaller businesses and medium-sized businesses go under, you have the big businesses swoop in and buy them up. So you have this corporate consolidation and this move towards monopolies, further exacerbating wealth and income inequality. And you have a distinct shift away from small business entrepreneurship and, you know, people kind of controlling their own destiny and making a living that way.
You see that the Yelp data says that 60% of businesses who went under during COVID, that the ruling class and the propagandists promised us, you know, this is just a COVID thing. You know, this isn't a deeper economic crisis. These businesses are going to bounce back. We always bounce back together, blah, 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 blah. But now 60% of the small businesses that went under are staying closed. That's 163,755 total. And as Kyle says, this is smaller and mid-sized businesses because they go under and the big ones come in and swoop them up, which he calls corporate consolidation or a move to monopolies, which increases income inequality. And in Marxist terms, this is accumulation and concentration. And this is something that Marx has noticed within capitalism since the very beginning, since the Industrial Revolution, that as capital accumulates, so long as there's no intervention by the government or by organized workers or unions or something, capital is going to continue accumulating and concentrating in a sort of spiral-like motion. So less and less people are going to control the wealth and control the means of production. But that group of less and less, smaller and smaller people are going to accumulate more and more and more. And this is exactly what we've seen. as well as what we talked about last week when we were talking about Lenin's imperialism. We've seen a move away from the stage of capitalism which it's based upon, which is free competition between private property owners, and a move into monopoly. There's no longer free market competition, but monopolies which control the markets and make it impossible for small business owners to enter the markets. And I don't think socialists should dismiss the problems of the petty bourgeoisie, meaning like small business owners. Because the petty bourgeoisie, as accumulation and concentration in capitalism's monopoly stage take place and progress and get worse, the petty bourgeoisie are proletarianized. Right? If you're a petty bourgeoisie small business owner and your business goes under during an economic crisis as the corporations are getting bailed out by the government, you're going to have to go back to being a worker. You're going to become a wage laborer. You're going to have to sell your labor to somebody who does own capital in order to survive. So as capitalism moves into its monopoly stage, it continually proletarianizes these petty bourgeois small business owners, throws them into the workforce. And historically, the petty bourgeoisie can go either way during times of revolution, right? They'll pretty much side with whoever it looks like is going to win. If it looks like the capitalists are going to win, most of the petty bourgeoisie will side with them. If it looks like the proletariat's going to win, most of the petty bourgeoisie will side with them. So we can't, reject the idea that we would ally with sections of that class or, have allies within that class. People forget that Engels, is the son of a capitalist owner. The son of a capitalist, capital owner, and he used that money, this part of the surplus value, to fund the works of Karl Marx. Marx should not have said, "No, Engels, I'm against capitalism and therefore I'm against your money." It makes no sense. Marx needed to pay for his own means of subsistence, and he was writing revolutionary theory for the overthrow of capitalism. So even though Engels was from a capitalist family, he did more for the revolution than, many, many, many people throughout history. As I was saying, accumulation and concentration are two things that Marx analyzes within capitalism from the beginning. So what Marx is looking at during his time and sort of during the time of the Industrial Revolution, or its mid stage of progression, or even later stage of progression, is you're seeing all these artisans, all these people whose craft it is to make certain things. Right, their labor can create something that people need, and therefore they're valuable. Or they create, some kind of artwork that's sold at the market during the era of mercantilism. And what's happening to these artisans as capitalism progresses and as capital accumulates and concentrates is they're being proletarianized, the same way the petty bourgeoisie is today. So Marx is watching all these people who are artistically talented or who are very skilled at making something be thrown into conditions of poverty and thrown out of their job as an artisan as mass production is carried on and accumulation and concentration take place and monopolies begin to take hold of capitalism. Capitalism begins to transition out of its stage of free competition and more into its stage of monopolies. So it's a similar sort of effect of proletarianizing the petty bourgeoisie as what Marx observed with the proletarianization of the artisan class. And yeah, again, it's sort of, you can visualize it as sort of a spiral, right? A spiral starts wider at the beginning, and as it concentrates and gets closer to a point, it gets smaller. It's smaller towards the top. So that's the accumulation and the concentration of capital. Lenin obviously talks about in the chapter that we talked about on the last stream in his book Imperialism, how capitalism transitions from its stage of free competition, where private property owners are freely competing with each other on the market, and people are more free to enter the market if you want to become an entrepreneur or a business owner. But once it transitions out of this, once accumulation and concentration lead to more monopolies, which are able to control the market and control the government and the state and use that to control markets, capitalism reaches a new stage, not only a stage of monopoly, which is the opposite of free competition, but it's imperialist stage, because these monopolies are going to capture all the home markets, all the markets domestically, and then they're going to look to go abroad. They're going to look to expand, to export capital. And that's how we get imperialism. And, in modern economics, they talk about a low or a high barrier to entering certain markets. That just basically means new businesses' ability to start a business or start a new firm in a certain industry. If it's really easy to start a new firm, there's a low barrier to entering the market. If it's really tough, there's a high barrier. And almost every, sort of industry in America today has moved away from the stage of free competition, has moved away from low barrier to entry, and has gotten higher, or the barriers to entry have gotten higher and higher and higher and higher because monopolies so thoroughly control all of our markets.
And this is not good. This is not good. If you're a small business enthusiast, this should terrify you, because let me tell you something. These 60% of business closures, yeah, they're small businesses. The large ones can weather the storm. The large corporations got bailouts, giant bailouts. The crumbs that went to the smaller businesses, it's not enough for them to weather the storm. And so we're going to see this giant consolidation. And listen,
Absolutely. I mean, he's calling it consolidation, but obviously the sort of scientific term that Marx gives this is accumulation or concentration. And he notices something vital in this process of accumulation, especially in the modern era, especially within the last 40 years of capitalism. And that's the government bailouts of big corporations, the large bourgeoisie in times of economic crisis. So Lenin analyzed the state as it exists under capitalism, the government, as a dictatorship of capital. Right? Before we can achieve socialism, the working class has to seize political power, creating a dictatorship of the workers or a dictatorship of the proletariat. But as the state currently exists, it's not a liberal democracy. It's not controlled by the people. It is a dictatorship of capital, because capital accumulation has led to capitalists controlling the media, controlling the news, controlling the education systems, and having more and more influence in government, to the point now where they passed Citizens United in the United States about 10 years ago now, basically legalizing political bribery, literally saying that corporations' money counts as free speech. And because our country protects freedom of speech, corporations are able to donate as much to campaigns as they want, or to super PACs, or to lobby for various bills. And most of our bills, most of our policies are literally written by corporate lobbyists now. They're not even written by the politicians we elect. So it's obvious that this system is an oligarchy or a dictatorship of capital. Those who own capital, not necessarily the petty bourgeois small business owners, but the giant corporations, who own vast amounts of capital, are the ones who control the government. This is how it's always worked under capitalism. Now they're going to use the government then to help them out in any way that they can, to help themselves accumulate capital, to concentrate and to concentrate capital at the top and maximize their surplus value, maximize their profits, maximize how much money they're able to invest in expanding their capitalist empire. So that's something Lenin notices about the state under capitalism, and something that we got from Marx is an analysis of the constant crises of capitalism. Crises are inherent to capitalism. In modern Western economics, this is called the business cycle, right? You go through times of recession and slowdown, and you build back up and go through times of prosperity, and it just goes up and down like this. These are crises of overproduction, crises when there's too much produced, but the workers aren't paid enough money to buy back what they're producing. And we get various crises created. These are also exacerbated by banking, which develops in the monopoly stage of capitalism. Banks induced the 2008 financial crisis by giving a bunch of loans to people who couldn't afford houses, jacking up the interest rates on those loans. And then when people couldn't pay them back, the banks would just evict them from their house or whatever else. And eventually a vast amount of people couldn't pay back their loans, and all the big banks went under before being bailed out by the government, because the government is a dictatorship of capital. So in these times of crises, which are incessant, which happen over and over and over and over again, they never do anything for the workers. They never even really do anything for the small businesses. They just give millions and millions of our tax dollars to big banks and big corporations to bail them out, allow them to keep going.
You know, there's some big businesses I like, of course, but I would love it if we still had the option to go to small business restaurant, for example, you know, and this really is kind of like a death blow to another aspect of what would commonly be called the American dream. 60% of business closures are now permanent. Think about all the lives that were destroyed. Now, as this is going on, I got more for you. The top.
We'll go back to that, but I mean, he's right. And that has to do with what I was saying. You know, don't just dismiss small business owners or the petty bourgeoisie because they exploit people or because they have exploited people. They have, but a lot of their livelihoods have just been crushed. You know, 160,000 plus of these small and medium-sized businesses have just gone under. And those are people who are in the working class now. They lost everything, you know, so they're going to have to become wage laborers or they're not going to be able to survive. So it's good to talk about this and to point out what's happening and give an analysis of this concentration. And I like what Kyle said there about the death blow to the American dream, because it really is. The American dream is the idea, you know, that you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that in America, there's always going to be a low enough barrier to entry with our markets. There's always going to be enough free competition to where anybody, you know, who has a good idea and works hard can create a good life for them or their family, you know, can start a small business. And, you know, the American dream includes the idea that working people should be paid enough to support themselves and their family. But small businesses is definitely part of it. And we're seeing how capitalism is never going to allow the American dream to be a thing. Capitalism is always going to lead to accumulation, concentration, and the maximization of capitalist exploitation. The minimization of workers' wages and paying for workers' health care. And actually, they're going to, you know, use the healthcare system to make money off people. Capitalism just commodifies everything and finds a way to use everything to exploit people. It's never going to allow for this utopian system of free competition that libertarians imagine. And if we look at 21st century socialism, you could, you know, draw these comparisons with China and other socialist countries, but Nicaragua is one I like to bring up because they have created programs for budding entrepreneurs. They have started programs helping working class people get their small business ideas off the ground because they've been exploited by multinational companies for such a long time. Right, their version of socialism isn't like a strictly we just need to seize all of the capital in our country today and immediately transfer it to the workers. Right, they're trying to construct socialism, build socialism in a country that has been damaged by neocolonialism and exploited by Western multinationals for a long time. So part of their construction of socialism is helping small business owners get off the ground. Of course, there are still regulations for how those small businesses treat their workers, socialist regulations, so they don't allow small businesses to just freely exploit people. But developing small business as opposed to giant monopoly foreign multinational corporations just siphoning all their country's resources. They say we prefer the small businesses, right? And part of our construction of socialism is supporting these as opposed to supporting accumulation and concentration. So, yeah, it's just how one of the ways that 21st century socialism has adapted to our current conditions and has placed themselves sort of, you know, in support of certain sections of the petty bourgeoisie or in sections or, you know, of sections of the proletariat who have a business idea and want to bring themselves out of poverty, as opposed to multinational corporations and conglomerates, which capitalism in its monopoly stage is dominated by. Right, the U.S. empire is dominated by giant banks and corporations. It's not dominated by small business owners. They just don't have the money and power.
1% of Americans have taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90%, and that's made the U.S. less secure. This is not some back-of-the-napkin approximation. According to a groundbreaking new working paper by Carter C. Price and Catherine Edwards of the Rand Corporation, had the more equitable income distributions of the 3 decades following World War II, 1945 through 1974, merely held steady, the aggregate annual income of Americans earning below the 90th percentile would have been $2.5 trillion higher in the year 2018 alone. That is an amount equal to nearly 12% of GDP, enough to more than double median income, enough to pay every single working American in the bottom 9 deciles an additional $1,144 a month. There's your UBI every month, every single year. Price and Edwards calculate that the cumulative tab for our 4-decade-long experiment in radical inequality had grown to over $47 trillion from 1975 through 2018. At a recent pace of about $2.5 trillion a year, that number we estimate crossed the $50 trillion mark by early 2020. That's $50 trillion that would have gone into the paychecks of working Americans had inequality held constant. $50 trillion that would have built a far larger and more prosperous economy. $50 trillion that would have enabled the vast majority of Americans to enter this pandemic far more healthy, resilient, and financially secure. So if we have the same amount of income and wealth inequality that we had in what was called the golden age of economic expansion in the United States, working people would be $50 trillion wealthier. So the top 1% has rigged the game and have effectively taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90%. Isn't that incredible? I mean, you go back, how many?
So he says something really interesting there that I thought was interesting. He says this wealth accumulation and this increase in inequality, which he gave a bunch of really good statistics on, has made the U.S. less secure, as opposed to other times in the history of the U.S. before the last 40 years of trickle-down of Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, neoliberalism. And this is because class struggle increases, working class discontent, rebellion, or riots in certain cases increase when conditions are this bad. When the average person is 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck and 60% have experienced medical debt. People are struggling to afford their means of subsistence. Living an everyday life, just working a job and being able to support yourself is becoming almost impossible because of this accumulation. So yes, that leads to riots, or that leads to rebellions, that leads to threats in, quote unquote security, leads to increases in class struggle. And, he talks about how at other times in America's history, the wealth inequality hasn't been this bad. The early 1900s were a great example. Before that, we had what they call the Gilded Age, another age of just massive inequality, massive concentration at the top. And workers got organized, right? Workers got organized at this time, and they demanded reforms. Since that time, these worker organizations have been crushed. In the last 40 years, since Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher dominated the U.S. and the U.K. and, went ahead with so-called trickle-down economics, they've busted up these unions, busted up our collective bargaining rights, cut into Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, dismantled various welfare programs, including food programs for women and children. We've seen all these reforms that workers organized and fought for destroyed. And also, let's keep in mind that when these workers were organizing under FDR, when they were organizing for these reforms, there were 1 million card-carrying communists in the U.S., right? And after World War II in 1945 to 1950, we saw more wildcat strikes in the U.S. than any other time in our history, because people had a lot of jobs from World War II. And as World War II was ending, they didn't want to lose those jobs or lose their higher wages or lose the benefits that they had fought for. But all these reforms have been dismantled, right? Which leads to working class discontent and various effects of that, which are exacerbated, made worse by medical crises, health crises like COVID-19. It just deepens the economic crises and the economic contradictions that we're already experiencing.
Many times have we talked about this on the show, but you go back to like the 1970s, for example, and you get the CEO to worker pay ratio. Like the CEO would make like 24 times what the average worker would make. Now that's a big difference. That's a big difference. But somewhere within the realm of that which is reasonable. You might say, hey, maybe 10-1 is more fair or whatever, but that's where we were. Today, it's like 300 or 350-1. That's the CEO to average worker pay ratio. This is right in line with that kind of a fact. Like, oh, if we just held steady from what we were doing back then, working people would be $50 trillion richer, and you would be able to weather the storm of a pandemic. But the economy's rigged. All the money's going to the corporations and the wealthy, and so you're screwed. And so 46% of the country has, quote, serious financial problems. 30-some-odd% couldn't pay their rent. And this is going back a couple months now. I don't know how else to say this, guys. We need drastic action now. Now. And the two things that pop up.
And before we get to his solutions, I want to talk about this idea that capitalists have rigged the game. Right? It's sort of this libertarian idea that real capitalism, free competition capitalism without the government or whatever. Well, that's not what Kyle believes, but Kyle believes when the government is doing social welfare programs, that's good capitalism, right? That's not rigged capitalism because wealth inequality is lesser. It's like capitalists haven't rigged the game. This has always been the game. The game is class struggle, and they've just been kicking our ass for a long time, right? We just haven't been organizing and haven't been fighting back directly, haven't been organizing at the workplace. We've been convinced that socialism could never work. A lot of people have been convinced that unions are bad and the government is busting up their unionizing rights out of their own self-interest. What a joke. As we said, the government is a dictatorship of capital. Of course, that's not what they're doing. But this is not a rigged game. This is what the game's always been. There have been times where we've, as a working class, as the working mass, we've been losing this game of class struggle less. That like the early 1900s when conditions got really, really bad and people started getting organized and fought for all these social welfare reforms. At that point, the game of class struggle was tilting more in the favor of the workers than it is today. But especially in the last 40 years, starting with Ronald Reagan, the capitalists have dominated this game of class struggle. And it's not rigged. I mean, it kind of is, but this is built into the relations of production, which is how Marx was able to analyze accumulation and concentration, these phenomena we're still seeing develop within capitalism today in the 1800s. Marx was able to see it all that ways back.
In my mind, first, our Medicare for all, because everybody deserves healthcare as a human right, and we're just catching up to the rest of the developed world if you do that, and you get rid of a giant bill, which is a problem for a lot of Americans. Medical bills is one of the top causes of bankruptcy. Take that off the table. Medicare for all for everybody now, and also universal basic income. I mean, there's your UBI right there. It's $1,144 more every month, every year. That's if we just kept the system functioning in the same level of income and wealth inequality as we had during the golden age of economic expansion.
So you want to fight for more reforms that they're going to dismantle? Right? You want to fight for more half measures, more, slight policies to make sure that working people aren't dying en masse every day of things like medical debt and inability to afford healthcare so that we can maintain the current system. Just put in these tiny, tiny, small reforms or fight for these little reforms that the capitalists are going to eventually undo or cut into, but at least it'll, allow for capitalism to be maintained, for the U.S. empire to maintain their security. We're still going to have a dictatorship of capital. The state is still going to belong to the capitalist class, and they're not going to give us an inch unless they think that we're literally going to destroy them unless they give us some kind of reforms. But, at that point, we should just completely destroy them and take full political power for the working class. It's the only way. That's the only way. You have to turn the government into a dictatorship of the workers. Otherwise, it will always be a dictatorship of capital. They're always going to bail out the big banks and the big corporations in times of economic crisis, and they're never going to give us Medicare for all. And also, I'm getting a master's degree in healthcare administration right now. I promise you, Medicare for all is not even close to good enough to fix our system. Right? People say that Obamacare was a half measure. No, Obamacare is an extremely far-right capitalist system of healthcare, a system of insurance. Medicare for all is, Medicare for all is the half measure, right? But corporations have their hands in everything. Capital has concentrated and accumulated at the top in healthcare. You have these giant conglomerates like CVS Group, which are made up of not just insurance companies, but pharmaceutical companies or pharmaceutical shareholders, people who own shares in this, in ambulance companies, in providers, in company or corporations who own hospitals. And not only is all of healthcare commodified, not only are shareholders making money off medicine and off the hospitals and off the ambulances and not just off insurance, right? But they're all intertwined. They're all these things are owned by these conglomerates of a very few banks and shareholders. So we need to target those conglomerates, nationalize them, make them public, decommodify healthcare completely, or our system's still going to be terrible. And our system's still going to throw 60% of the country into medical debt, which is an insane stat. Yes, we need Medicare for all. Yes, the insurance companies are the worst part of our system. They're literally a mafia who does nothing in relation to healthcare. They just sit in between you and your healthcare and rob you. They're the worst part. But getting rid of that doesn't fix capitalism. It does not fix the healthcare system. It doesn't decommodify the system. The problem is that they're making profit and making surplus value off the system at all, that they're exploiting people with the system at all. It should be a public system. But that's socialism, and that's evil, and that's off the table, right? And then as for UBI, Universal Basic Income, that is a Milton Friedman policy from 1962. That's just what it is. It was called the negative income tax back then. And the whole idea of the UBI is to maintain capitalism, right? The UBI is tax capitalists a little bit because they're not going to give workers an inch unless you force them to. Give some of that money to workers so they can keep buying stuff, continue consumerism, and continue to keep the capitalist profits really high. And this is Milton Friedman's paper about the negative income tax when he came up with this idea. But all this does is maintain corporate profits and maintain consumerism. Does nothing to fix U.S. and foreign policy. Does nothing about our entirely too bloated military budget. Does nothing to change the system systematically. And Medicare for all only changes the system in terms of insurance. We need to target the relations of production. We need to nationalize vast sectors of the economy and move them into public hands, move them into the hands of the workers, reinvest the surplus value of these oil companies and of these healthcare conglomerates and whatever else, and reinvest it in our people, in social welfare programs. And we also need to get our people organized into unions and organs of working class power. Attacking the foundations of capitalism, not just making reforms that are ultimately half measures. And the thing about UBI is, that is a capitalist reform to its core. There's a reason Milton Friedman was such a big advocate of the UBI, one of the most staunch neoliberal, trickle-down, dogmatic capitalists who I think worships the invisible hand of the free market, or what he calls the invisible hand of the free market, even though the market leads to monopolization and no free markets. But what happens with UBI and why it was first invented is because it's a scheme to force people into the workforce and out of unemployment. So the idea is you pay everybody unemployment benefits. So then there's no purpose in being on unemployment. So for one, this hurts disabled people, because what always happens if UBI or negative income tax gets enacted is the government says, or the pro-capitalist bourgeois parties come out and say, why are we giving people welfare, right? Why are we giving people checks for disability? You already get disability checks via the UBI. Everybody gets disability checks. So it disproportionately hurts disabled people. So it's an ableist policy in that way, because it makes or it takes away checks for the disabled. Two, employers realize that they can depress wages. They can lower wages and pay people less than what their workers need to survive, less than what they need to buy their means of subsistence, because the government will just pick up the slack, right? The government is going to pay people anyways what they need to survive, so the capitalists can just depress their wages way lower artificially. And this decreases economic productivity and technological advancement because capitalists realize if wages are really low, it doesn't pay to invest in developing the means of production, expanding the means of production, expanding technological productivity. Because normally that would allow them to get rid of some of their workers because of the increased productivity of labor that comes from technological advancements, which is bad how capitalism throws workers into unemployment when technology advances. But economic progression, economic advancement and development and increases in technology are good overall. And the UBI leads to a vast decrease in that. Again, maintaining capitalism, stopping the means of production from developing to the point where they show the inefficiency of capitalism, preventing the means of production from developing at all, and maintaining the capitalist system. And actually even making it a worse capitalist system for disabled people and others. So UBI is not going to fix anything, right? It's not even a reform. It helps the capitalists, and Medicare for all would be great. But we need the workers to take political power. We need a dictatorship of the proletariat. And we need to start nationalizing these big sectors of economic power, the telecommunications, the oil, the major industries, the banks, and make these work for the workers. Take them from the capitalists completely. Who cares about these giant shareholders who have been robbing us for this long? I sure don't. They've been fighting the class struggle. It's about time we fight back.
Those are the first two things that pop in my mind. And now we need it more than ever. I mean, listen, we got to learn from history, learn from what FDR did with the New Deal. Yes, we could do a Green New Deal, emphasis on the New Deal part, create millions of, good paying jobs that are in renewable and green energy and technology. Definitely can do that. Rebuild our infrastructure all across this country, make it an A+. But we need Medicare for all and we need UBI. We have to radically change the country because we can't keep going like we're going right now. And if this article is true, and I think it is, that is effectively the 1% robbing all working people in this country, and they've been doing it your entire life. Your whole life.
We need to learn from history and learn from FDR. Yes, we do. We need to learn that class struggle, that organized workers forced FDR into every single reform that he enacted. That workers who were angry after the Great Depression, and workers who were looking at the economic growth in the Soviet Union and demanding that the U.S. move towards socialism, a million card-carrying communists, forced FDR's hand. And Kyle's taking the totally wrong conclusion of this from this. We need to learn from history and do what FDR did. No, we need to realize that all of the reforms enacted under FDR were, one, forced by the working class via class struggle, not granted to us by the benevolent politician FDR. And two, they've been dismantled by the capitalist class since then. FDR had most of his reforms repealed. So what we should learn from history is that we need to seize government power for the workers completely. That, begging the capitalists for reforms is not going to do anything. That voting for AOC and Bernie Sanders every year and hoping that they actually fight for us in Washington is not going to cut it. They're not going to fight for us. AOC and these people have proven that over and over and over again. And no offense to Kyle, it was an honorable effort, but he started the Justice Democrats. His idea like 8 years ago was we're going to have all these Democrats who don't take corporate PAC money, and they're going to be uncorrupt, and they're going to take over the Democratic Party and fight for Medicare for all. We can't even get AOC in the squad to force the vote. Right? They won't fight for us at all in Washington, which is what Lenin's been saying from the beginning. You can't vote your way out of capitalism. You can't vote your way out of a dictatorship of capital. When are we going to start organizing ourselves and fighting back ourselves rather than just voting for the squad, donating a couple dollars of our paltry wages to the squad and praying to God that they actually fight for us or do something for us.
And they've been doing it your entire life, your whole life. Because some people will listen to, when we talk about UBI, they'll look at it as like, it's welfare, you're getting something that you're not owed. Wrong. The welfare has always cut in the other direction. It's working people giving welfare to the wealthy. There is class war in this country, and it's waged by the rich on working people. All the rules are rigged in their favor. When corporations and wealthy individuals give money to the politicians, and then the politicians turn around and give them giant subsidies and giant bailouts, that's welfare. That's the thing that you're supposed to be against. That's money for absolutely nothing. It's the corrupt system. That's what that is. And so when one of us says, hold on, I want to eliminate that welfare, and I just want to give the people what they're owed. If you want to just give the people what they're owed, working people got 50 trillion coming now, don't they?
I mean, this is where Kyle's analysis is really good again. Everything he said about class war, and about how the capitalist class have been the ones waging the class war, and we haven't been fighting back. That's true. And, that leads to a dictatorship of capital, leads to them controlling the government and doing giant subsidies and bailouts in times of crisis. Again, that's true. But when are we going to actually fight back? When are we actually going to organize our workplaces and fight back instead of just waiting for the squad to do it for us, which they're never going to do? And if we're going to give people what they're owed, as Kyle said, give them what they're owed, that's everything. Everything is created by the labor of workers. Capitalists do nothing but shuffle money around. Everything is created by the labor of workers. So what Kyle's doing is he's comparing what workers make now when they're super exploited after 40 years of neoliberalism and crushing of working class organizations, comparing that super exploitation to a previous time in history when there was less exploitation, right? And then saying workers are owed this. The super exploited workers should be paid what the regularly exploited workers were paid in the 60s or whatever. When workers were slightly more organized, so they were able to fight against their own exploitation. But labor creates all profits. All profit and surplus value that the capitalists take is theft of value that is created by labor. Which is why even when workers were more organized and when they were exploited less and when we had certain reforms enacted, it didn't last. Right? It didn't last. The capitalists regained full control, busted up the worker organizations, and exploited them to the max. So the solution isn't to be like, I remember, when we were a little bit less exploited by these giant corporations in the 60s. Let's go back to that. No, the point is to get more organized than they were in the 60s, learn from our mistakes, seize political power from these greedy corporations who want to push us into a nuclear war with China and Russia while doing nothing for the working masses and allowing us all to live paycheck to paycheck and in severe debt. Take political power from them and begin changing the relations of production. Begin moving the means of production into the hands of the workers by reinvesting the country's economic surplus. Begin nationalizing major sectors of the U.S. economy, using the political power, the government that workers have taken, to take these corporations, to take the means of production out of the hands of these shareholders who have been robbing us and super exploiting us and sending our children of working families to fight and die in imperialist wars for expansion. Seize their means of production and use all the wealth that's created by human labor and the means of production combined, and use that wealth in investing in society and creating a society based on human flourishing rather than the exploitation of one class by another, which is what our current society is entirely based on.
Give us Medicare for all. We got to do a UBI. I like the way Andrew Yang frames it when he says, what does he call it? Freedom dividend? Something along those lines? Like, the idea is, no, you're a stakeholder in America. That's what you are. So in the same way that if you own a blue chip stock, you get paid. If you're born in America, you're an American citizen, there's a freedom dividend. There's an American payment. It's Social Security for all. That's more my framing than his framing, that part. But yes, you're part of this country. You're not getting anything you weren't owed. This is part of the deal. And if anything, the wealthy and the corporations have been robbing this country blind for decades, ever since they started allowing money in politics.
I mean, Andrew Yang is a capitalist, and you can really see with the way he describes his policy, right? The freedom dividend isn't a bad name, but he's like, you're a shareholder in America, right? You're a stakeholder. It's everything is framed through a capitalist lens, through a bourgeois lens, right? We need to give the exploited people more money, and maybe then they could start a small business and become the exploiters, and we can bring back the American dream. And economically, this stuff's never going to stop accumulation, and it's never going to do anything to stop capitalism because it doesn't target the capitalist relations of production. It doesn't target the capitalist worker relation where the capitalists own the means of subsistence and everything we need to survive. So the vast majority of society is forced to sell their labor for a wage in order to survive. Right? It does nothing to change those relations. It actually helps maintain those relations because Andrew Yang is a capitalist. So everything, including how they argue in favor of the policy, is argued from a bourgeois lens. Right? You're going to be a shareholder in America. You're going to be just like Bill Gates. And also, Kyle says the corporations have been robbing us ever since they allowed money in politics. No, it was way before then. And this is the problem with social democrats. They look at politics first, the government first, and then economics. When in reality, the economic system and the relations of production are what control the government. So it hasn't been that the capitalists have been exploiting us, taking from the workers what the workers are actually worth and the wealth that the workers actually create, taking the vast majority of it. That didn't start with money in politics. Right? That led to money in politics. That exploitation led to accumulation of wealth, which the capitalist class then used to control the government more and more and more and more, to the point where we got Citizens United and they literally legalized bribery. But that didn't come before the accumulation. It helped lead to more accumulation after it happened and more capitalist control of the government. But it stems from the relations of production, from the exploitation at the core of the economic system. And if we don't attack that exploitation at the core, the government is always going to work as a dictatorship of the capital, the way it works now.
And so it's time to get back what we're owed. And this is unacceptable. And we need to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, are we really okay with this? Are we really okay with 60% of businesses closing due to the coronavirus? And it's staying like that? Are we really okay with corporations consolidating and monopolies popping up and controlling markets and then jacking up prices and screwing people along the way and paying people crap? Are we really okay with that? Are we okay with the system continuing to be rigged in favor of the wealthy? I'm certainly not. We know the answers. We just have to fight for them and get them implemented. I really think the only way is a general strike, because the politicians aren't going to listen to us unless we make them listen to us. And the best way to do that is to cut off their money. How do you cut off their money? Stop working. Well, we all got to do it. We all got to get out there. We have to have a clear list of demands. And this is the only way we succeed, because divided, we're definitely going to fall, because we've been divided all along, and look at what they've been doing to us.
I mean, he's right. His sentiment there is totally correct. We cannot let the rich continue to do this, continue to run our country, or it's going to lead us into economic and political collapse. It's going to lead to total degradation for the working class. But the only way to do this is to enact socialism, is to organize workers to struggle directly against the capitalists and struggle directly for political power, and work to abolish the existing relations of production, put more of the centers of economic power into the hands of the workers. And the only way to do this is through ownership of the means of production. Only way to transfer ownership of the means of production is for the workers to seize the state. But he calls for a general strike there, which is, a good idea. And as he said, it results from workers, or it's workers withholding their labor because their labor creates all value, and that cuts off the capitalist money supply. And he talks about workers needing to be united because the capitalists have been united against us for so long. But a general strike is just such a utopian or anarchistic idea, When is every worker in every major industry just going to simultaneously decide to do a strike? Never, unless you have mass organization, mass grassroots organization, mass education of the working class on political and economic theory. Because much of the working class doesn't even know that their labor is what creates all wealth. They haven't even thought about it in that way. They don't realize that if they were organized into a union, they could strike or threaten strike and withhold their labor, which would stop the capitalist profits, which is all the capitalist wants. So really the power is in our hands, but it's organization and education which helps workers realize that the power is in their hands. And then there has to be mass strategizing and mass coordination to actually do something like a general strike or a general strike in a certain area. And there's been so many like leftists or progressives or social democrats, people who watch Kyle Kulinski who will just post like memes about how we need a general strike. It's like, yes, but you can post as many Facebook memes as you want, and it's fine. But unless we have real grassroots organization and coordination between the working class, unless the working class actually sees themselves as a class, and actually sees themselves as engaging in class struggle against the ruling mass, we're never going to be able to bring something like that into action. And even more so than a general strike, we need strategic struggle. We need to form organs of working class power. Political parties like the Communist Party in the early 19th century that Kyle talked a lot about in this video, as one of the times when there was less exploitation and less wealth inequality. The Communist Party had 1 million members. Right? We need organs of working class political power. We need organs of direct worker power like the unions. You need to organize. We need people organizing their workplace, getting heavily involved in the unions, reading theory to educate themselves, developing tighter relations with the party, strengthening, PSL or CPUSA, the working class communist socialist political parties we have in this country. That is the key. Reforms aren't going to do it. Reforms don't change the relations of production. Reforms don't lead to working class political power. And reforms are always eventually undone by the capitalist class. There is no reforming capitalism. We need to organize and fight against capitalism at its root. We need to fight against the relations of production, the capitalist relations of production, and wage slavery.